Hey, and welcome back to the Astro All-Stars podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Montgomery, and today I have two very special guests that are representing for the Queer Astrology Conference 2023, which is what we'll be speaking about today. QAC, which is Care. Hi, Care, and welcome.
Hi, so happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
You're so welcome. Midnight Care, currently midnight in Berlin. And
yes,
from New York, we have Demetrius Bagley, who is putting this whole show on the road.
Whole show on the road.
That's it. So Care is a speaker. I did this Queer Astrology Conference in 2020, which Demetrius also put together, produced, and found it was really interesting, bringing up a lot of different ideas and conversations. And I think we are having a proliferation of this now. And I think a lot of it's driven by the Queer Astrology Conference as a bit of a hub, because everything's just so sort of diffuse through social media. So I was thinking this is a nice way to bring everyone together and to platform a lot of really interesting people that we normally wouldn't find, or it can be hard to find if you're not in that particular slipstream, and get exposure to fresh voices as well and new faces. So welcome. We're going to start with Care as a speaker. Let's look at where you are and ground down into, so you're French and you're living in Berlin at the moment, where it's midnight.
Yes. It's midnight and it's freezing cold.
And it's so boiling here. So
yeah.
Just put the aircon on. We've got solar panels. It's okay. So how is that living in Berlin? Is there much astrology scene in France or Berlin? Is that happening there? Have you found that there?
I haven't, but I have to say, I think it's also me not really looking into it. I'm sure it does exist. It's just that, sometimes astrology groups can feel a little bit like, I don't know, I don't feel like maybe it would be my vibe, but maybe I'm completely wrong. I know that, because and if you don't know, Berlin is a very queer, quote unquote, friendly city. And so, a lot of queer people are so in tune with astrology. So I think that, I can speak with anybody about astrology. I feel like it would never be weird. In France, maybe it's a little bit weirder, maybe not with queer people specifically, but when I say that I'm an astrologer, usually people look at me like, what do you mean you're an astrologer? Like, what do you do actually to pay your bills? So, but in Berlin, it's more normal, I would say, to be an astrologer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're in the right place.
Yeah. I feel like for now, at least, I'm in the right place for sure.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, France is when you have such a strong culture, sometimes it's a good thing. Then also it doesn't let in new things as easily, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think also what is complicated in France is, it's the same with German language, and I don't practice astrology in German. I'm not that fluent in German, but it's really hard to practice with a language that is very gendered for me as a person who tries to practice astrology in a queer way.
Yeah.
So, we don't have they, them. We do invented some kind of pronouns that is the mix between il and elle, which is he and she in French, but which is yel. But it's not, because it didn't exist to begin with, it's not as understandable for people. And I feel like it's going to take a while for France to get there. Sometimes it feels like this country it's 20 years late, so yeah, it's Latin-based languages also, it's harder, but
that's it. Yeah, I was just thinking that everything has a gender, even the table.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's really complicated to practice astrology in French, non-gendered. Like I just can't do that. It's really hard for me. So I practice everything in English. Yeah, so I think, for the moment, I'm in the right space for sure. I would love to practice in the US, to be honest, which maybe sound crazy, but I would love to, one day maybe go to New York for like some month. I wouldn't live there as a social security baby. I couldn't do that. But I do feel like it might be fun for me. And I also feel really connected to the queer community because people do amazing things like this Queer Astrology Conference. I wouldn't find this here. So I'm really grateful for the queer people, especially queer people of color in the US. I'm really always so inspired.
Yeah, it's true. Americans are they're so open to, I guess, anything that's like esoteric, spiritual, different to everywhere else in the world. I agree. It's amazing. That's probably where most of my base is as well. Definitely would love to go over again. It's so, yeah, come to me, Demetrius says. It's so fun too. You'll love it. Anyway, so that's interesting. So that takes us into, let's talk a bit more about, what does queer mean to you? And then go into what is queer astrology, because you've already started talking about approaching, like using a non-gendered approach, which I'm really into as well. It's like my main thing.
Yeah.
So what does queer mean to you?
I love this question. Queerness for me is not really just, or at least it's not an identifier only, but I actually live queerness and practice queerness as a way to deconstruct and unlearn oppressive and limiting ways of being and relating, and especially relating to not only to myself, but also to others, and also to the land and the stars. And I use also unlearning because I believe that, queerness was here first in a way, the world was queer until we decided to create binaries. So yeah, I feel like for me, queerness is really about practicing just unlearning.
Yeah, it's a good framework to use, I think, especially with the non-binary aspect coming in as well. Just
absolutely,
kind of decoupling things from gender, which astrology, oh my gosh, it's such a great tool for that. Like for me, I find like you can easily do it, at least in English, because you can call things Venusian, not feminine. You can call things Marsy. Oh, that's, it's Marsy or it's Venusian. And when people say, someone said about my teapot the other day, oh, it's very feminine, it's very pretty, it's very feminine. I said, oh, it's very Venusian, like Venus is present here as an archetype. And they're just like, what? It was my auntie, she's quite old. But I give everyone the lecture. I'm like, yeah, it's very Venusian. Which
I love
that's
that.
what we're talking about. Yeah. And Demetrius, what does queer mean to you?
Gosh, I don't know if I can answer better than Care.
That was a good answer. Yeah.
Really took me back to the first Queer Astrology Conference in 2013, almost 10 years ago. Queer means a few things to me. I think I'm Gen X, and so some people still find it a slur. I've always, to me, it was introduced as sort of a political rod, as it were, to provoke with Stop AIDS, and I'm forgetting the larger national organization. So
like Act Up.
Act Up, thank you. I kept seeing the Silence Equals Death sticker in my head. So I like to use it in the last decade or so. Well, actually, even before the first Queer Astrology Conference, because I think it keeps us, as Queer Astrology can, as the conference hopefully can, keeps us thinking and questioning. I don't think that necessarily means everything has to be, as maybe it does for others, unstable or uncertain, but I think it also sort of questions, how are you super, super certain? How are you that fixed? And some people, of course, have super fixed charts, if I could say it that way. But most of us don't. And yet maybe we sort of ape that. So that's one of my favorite things really about astrology in general, but maybe as a queer person, maybe I brought that in, and a card-carrying Aquarius sun, maybe I brought that into the whole mix. Not that I don't have my fixed moments, as you just heard, but yeah, there's something, I like how astrology seems to associate itself with curiosity. And I think what queerness does is sort of, I think Kara just said, I think it keeps us more open than not to asking questions, getting the answer, and then, oh, there's another question which might be related, might be tangential, might just even be a leap. And really going with that and finding, if I can say, the beauty, the Venus in that, the joy. I don't know if that's Jupiter or Venus, but yeah, and so on. So that's some of what queer to me. And also to as Kara definitely said, step away from binary in terms of sexuality, in terms of course, gender, and gendering people, but also tables, to your point, and Indian. So those are some things. Those are some things that I think about queer. And one of my favorite things from the first and second conference is maybe queering queer is just about questioning, without coming to any sort of 100 or even 99% certainty. Not that I don't like 99% some days. So I'll leave that there. Or let me throw this out to the audience to think about, and maybe we won't come back to it in this conversation. Are we questioning some things? I'll leave that hanging.
Yeah, always good to ask questions and not have definitive answers generally, I would say. And Kay, I see you're a Pisces, is that right? Pisces sun?
Yes, I'm a Pisces sun, romantic forever and always. Pisces sun in the 4th.
Oh, wow. And do you have the Neptune transit yet to your sun?
No, not yet, but I feel it, to be honest, I feel like, do I really need to feel it coming? Because I feel like I live in Neptune world anyways. Like, what is reality anyways? I don't know. But yeah, I feel like it's gonna be even weirder, maybe potentially. I don't know. I hope, yeah, my roommates are ready for that. But yeah, I love Neptune transits usually, but I have to say it's not really good with capitalism. So yeah.
We'll see. Yeah, well, just being a Pisces generally. Although in Neptune and Pisces era, I've definitely, because I watched this come in and I've seen the arts explode and I have seen that come through. And I guess because a lot of the millennials have that big stellium of Capricorn placements. Yeah, it's a better time. It's a better time to be a creative than in the past, if you ask me, as a creative person that went more the astrology way. Yeah, well, that'll be interesting. Keep an eye on Care for that Neptune transit to a Pisces sun.
Maybe I will just create like a workshop around hypnopoetic trances around water or something. Maybe that's a great way to honor Neptune.
Yeah, so Care, practice of Reiki, you're a hypnotist, clinical hypnotist as well. Yeah, so Pisces, right? So you're ready. You're ready for this. So do you feel like you answered what is queer astrology? What is your definition of queer astrology? Have you got more to say on that one?
Yeah, for sure. For me, it was hard for me to even. I don't know. I feel like astrology is queer by nature, just because I feel like the way that I live and practice astrology is really also as a land-based practice, relational practice. And the goal for me is to create relationship that is already here, or like witness and acknowledge the relationship between earth and skies, us and planet ancestors, present and time. And so astrology for me is queer because nature is queer, so I feel like it doesn't really create those false boundaries. And so to come back to that, of course, because of, our history as human beings, we've created those binaries based on colonialism and like also the invention of race so that capitalism can be created and, big system that we have to depend on and, be in. But for me, astrology is queer by nature. I just really feel like, because it's also, when I think about the cosmos or just the universe is just so infinite. And so queerness for me is also infinite. It's just asking those questions and just another question pops in. And maybe you realize, actually, maybe the goal of this is not to find answers, but to ask better questions. So it's just kind of never ends. So yeah, astrology, when people ask me this, I'm always thinking, but then what is cis and straight astrology? Like, I don't know if straight astrology would be something that even straight people would actually sign into. I don't know. Maybe they would actually, but I feel like astrology is queer because it's a land-based practice and it's rooted in nature, in the cycles of, you know, nature around us. So nature is definitely queer.
That's a really good point. It just makes me think of, it's such an old modality. It predates Christianity. It predates a lot of the way we have binaried up, you know, the way we see things. So maybe that's why it's a little bit of an escape hatch. It's already ready-made from a different system. I think that you can definitely fit it to the regular binary, and you can, I guess, reinforce and uphold that if you want to. Like, you know, those old astrology books where it's just got everything like the Aries man, the Aries woman, like they're two different species, like it's human. And that really annoys me. But I think it can definitely be upheld. And I've seen, you know, some of the older astrologers that they're really trying to do things differently, and they'll do like same-sex couples synastry charts and try to work out the sun and the moon and Venus and Mars, and they are not sure what to do. And it's just like, just do it the normal way. You know, everyone's got a Venus, everyone's got a Mars here. You don't take one and lose your Mars or lose your Venus, like be a whole person. So yeah, I think there's a point of educating people into, well, how can you use astrology in a non-binary way so that everyone relates to everything in their chart, and they don't have to give up kind of half that another person's meant to hold, you know.
Yeah, and also knowing that Asians have constructed this system, this technology that astrology is, as a way to understand where they were. Like, imagine you're just like on planet Earth and you have to understand, like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, what am I supposed to do? And you're trying to find directions. And so, of course, what you're going to do is you're going to look around and just see that there's cycles happening. And so I don't think Asians saw themselves as separated from nature, but actually, I think they, or at least I like to believe that they saw cycles and how nature was behaving and thinking, okay, if we understand better our environment, then we'll get to understand our landscapes, internal landscapes better, right? It's like, if it's a map and you can find your north with the North Star, you can find directions. Now we can find spiritual directions with astrology. That's how I practice astrology. So, and it's great also as an anti-capitalist practice for me, because I tell my clients, what if you don't have to buy, I don't know, people's courses or whatever to find your purpose? So what if you are the purpose, and the map is in your birth chart when you took your first breath and you said yes to this life? What if it's that? What if it's that magical? So yeah, I feel like it's just a nice way to just re-enchant our lives, because a lot of capitalism has like kind of like it just steals our life force, right? And it just makes us believe that we're just here to work. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful way also to root ourselves among the stars, like Octavia Butler said.
Totally agree. I've been noticing I've watched a lot on cults lately. And and yeah, just thinking about courses that I see, you know, in this 3-day course or whatever, they're promising a lure of, it's really promising spirituality, connection, finding yourself, things that people shouldn't be promising, but it was what people really want. And people going into cults, it's kind of the same thing. They're looking for something more that's non-materialistic, etc. Definitely looking also for community, feeling a bit lost. And I think that feeling a bit lost time, which can be Neptunian transits, and this is the magic of those transits, is that you just deal with feeling lost. Like, you just swim in that water and it's beautiful. I've definitely had those periods in my life. I've got Neptune Sun conjunction, so I can be quite comfortable with that, but I've definitely had it when it's at next level. And I've really enjoyed it. Just swim and see. And it's a very magical time because you're so open. Good when you're traveling as well, because it's easier to be open. Things just come to you. You don't have to have that certainty that everyone wants so bad. And like, when people ask you questions, they always want certainty from you. And if you can't give it to them, it's difficult socially. Like, people want to give that. So yeah, all very interesting. So speaking of which, what is your talk about? What are you presenting at the
so I'm presenting at the Queer Astrology Conference. Should I say 2023 Demetrius now, or 2022?
2023.
should I say 2023? Because it was 2022, but then so 2023,
should.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be confusing.
Okay, cool. So my talk is called Care Reimagined, Somatic Lessons About the Four Elements, Fire, Air, Water, Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I try to do in this talk is, it's really about radical care as the center of our practice, especially as astrologers, but also as people who want to practice astrology for their own chart. And I kind of start with, astrology is a care practice. So if we think about care, then we have to acknowledge trauma too. And trauma is basically when we are denied of our basic inherent needs as human beings. And we have three. I created a fourth one to go with the four elements, but it's safety, dignity, connection, and belonging. Mm-hmm. And so when we are denied of those inherent needs, it constitutes trauma, basically. And so in this talk, I link each element with our inherent needs. So fire relates to our inherent need for dignity, because fire tends to dance up towards the skies and wants to be seen and acknowledged. So that speaks to our dignity, our need for dignity. Mm-hmm. Air to our inherent need for connection. If you think about air signs, they're always like trying to get in contact, and air as an element is touching everything all at once. Water speaks to our need for belonging. If you think about water, we're 70% made of water, just like the body that we're living on, planet Earth. And water also speaks to, if you think about the first waters, Cancer is the womb. So it's really belonging to our bloodline, but also beyond bloodline, especially as queer people. We're so good at creating chosen families. And then Earth relates to our need for safety. So of course, Earth is the element that keeps most its shape. And so, Earth says no, but not because it wants to reject, but because it has to support us and has to be under us so that we can walk, right? So that's my talk. And so I kind of like show people into your chart how you can understand better your needs as a human being. So how can I feel seen? How can I feel witnessed, heard, celebrated? How do I feel like I belong? And so within your chart, you will be able to create kind of a care map for you to understand, what is it for me that makes me feel seen? What is it for me that makes me feel like I belong? And all of that. And so I love linking also astrology with somatics, as I end also my talk with a somatic practice, just because trauma is relational and healing has to happen there too. And astrology is really a relational practice. We practice astrology because we want to reconnect with ourselves, but also others and the land and the skies and the stars. And so I feel like there's so much healing that can happen through astrology. At least I've fostered so much healing through astrology. So I hope that I can offer this to folks too. And my hope is that I can turn this into a book at some point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think there's a lot to be said for the elements and just breaking it right back down to those basics, for sure. You could put
absolutely
the qualities of the elements just for extra a little bit. Yeah, for sure. So that sounds really interesting. And I think that, that pretty much speaks to the kind of ideas you get at the Queer Conference, aligning those things, and it just opens up the astrology from, I think, what people often think it is, how you can really use it. It's so rich. So Demetrius, can you tell us a little bit more about the talks that will be presented and some of the presenters?
Definitely. Gosh, you guys just said so much that I want to riff off of. Let me stay with your question though. So we have a more intimate conference this time. This is the 6th Queer Astrology Conference. Again, we'll turn 10 in July. And hopefully we will see more, which we'll speak about in a bit. We have a sextet for our 6th time, which is truly by, I don't know if it's by coincidence. I think it's cosmic coincidence, if I could say it that way. So you heard Care, we've got Krista Lee, we've got Rainer, we've got Agatha, and 3 others. The one thing that stands out to me, and I'm still, I haven't listened to all the talks, to be honest, and that's timing and coming off these Mercury and Mars retrogrades on multiple sides. We've got to talk about baseball. This is one of the few I've been to many, as I think we've talked about before, Vanessa, many astrology conferences, almost all in person, a few dozen, personally being lucky to live in New York. Sports is not often talked about. Actually, relationships, believe it or not, are not often talked about, particularly with depth. And I do mean romantic and or sexual relationships. And that's been striking to see even since that first astrology conference. But we've got one on baseball. We've got another one on relational astrology, which I'm excited about, overlapping the comment I just made. We've got another one about sect and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
Sect is a astrology technique for those listening may not know. We've got another talk about that, about / centers on, let me see if I can say it right, Andean astronomy. So looking at a different perception of the sky, which I know is something people ask quite a bit about outside of quote unquote the West, if I can say it, / Western world. There's a talk about sacred rage, which overlaps a book that I'm reading fictionally about the Trojan War. That's quite interesting. That's about Eris, ERIS, without going into Eris. And then again, cares, care reimagined. So those are the 6. And I hope people will check those out. And what's interesting, coming from right when you did it, Vanessa, in 2020, there were almost 40 talks or 40 pieces. Some were round tables,
huge.
right?
Yeah, it was
right.
Huge.
It was this huge gargantuan thing because we didn't say no to anyone, even though I'm glad we did it, but the goal was to be about half of that. It was about to be no more than 20, but life happens. And there was just a lot of juiciness, and it was 2020.
It was wild. Yeah.
Right? And it was a juicy year, or a few years in one, as it were. One of the things that stands out that Kier just reminded me of is, and something that you said too, just was 2 or 3 minutes. The first one, to me, I would say the first 2, maybe the second one, the talks were much more political, maybe socio-political, but political first and foremost, and did talk quite a bit about relationships, client and astrologer, in that order often, and a few other things without trying to parse all that out. These talks, I think, as a through line, are much more intimate and sort of this, I don't know how to explain better. They're coming from, they're not trying to talk so much about society and out there. They feel like they're much more inner. It feels like they're coming from a heart space, as opposed to the first was just trying to claim space. In the talks and in this, let me say landscape. I don't know if I want to say community singular of astrology. I'll try to unpack that a little bit before we go here. I want to circle back and still answer this question to sort of the first question you asked me today, Vanessa. This set of 6, I think, is again more heart. I think all of the Queer Astrology conferences have been very smart and been very sort of pushy, or at least pushing, right, to take up the space, as folks say, and bring something not always new, although often very new. I'm like, I don't think I've seen this talk on a roster before. But there's also something, and I'm not sure if I captured or in my head how you just said it, Kier. I think what queer astrology does in general, however we want to talk about queer astrology, and I've seen through the conferences, I haven't been to all of them. I didn't get to the 4th one in Portland, is they really talk about the chart as a circle and a whole and a 360, and the person like that. So, right, people, we're all hyphenated, right? We're all an offspring of a parent. We might also be a sibling. We might be this professional role. We might be this community role, right? And we're in multiple communities and so on. I think that's all very, certainly from this standpoint of the 20th century, early 21st, is very queer and is very different than the paradigm that does, as Kara said, or both of you said different ways. One, it's to put us in a box, right? Sort of to trim away the roundness, the fullness, the wholeness. I keep thinking of the chart. And again, literally sitting in that those Saturday, Sunday sessions, and had been practicing studying astrology, quote unquote, practicing, here and there practicing, for what, 15, almost 20 years at that point, maybe more without trying to do the math here, but a little over 20 actually, doing the math correctly now. And it was so refreshing, y'all. It was so refreshing because it was, well, we don't need to gender all these things, right? Just, I love what you're saying about the teapot and Venus. We can keep the magic in the tool and move it forward and bring the language with it. Also remembering, wait a minute, I don't know which of you just said, this all predates these very man-made things that have really been pushed to extremes in the last few centuries and even in our lifetimes, right? The last few decades. And I've been a vegan as long as I've been, a little bit longer, a few weeks longer than I've been an astrologer or a woo person, if you will, woo person. And I think a lot about, even in this conversation, cages, right? These literal boxes, right? And not the freedom of space and the fullness and being able to, I'm making a gesture if you're listening on audio, to run or walk in a circle as, some creatures do. I don't think all creatures do. So I just want to push this a little bit more and be quiet, at least on this. There's wholeness that astrology invites, particularly if the astrologer can get out of their way and thus really give more to the client. Not all of it. That's a lot to take in. I think anybody's life, astrology or not, whatever the modality is a lot to take in. But astrology, isn't it so fascinating how we can just get right in there? I've never met the person. Give me a few minutes to pull up this chart on the computer. Okay, I need to look at what's going on here. Of course, we've put in dozens, if not hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of study and practice and discussion and going to conferences and so forth. But really being able to help someone be like, you're good. Mercury and Pisces, my favorite example. A lot of the books I read, which were, I started studying in 1994. So, right, the books are from the 80s or 70s. I don't think I touched at first any sort of books predating sort of this. I take that, Linda Goodman, late sort of 60s books, but anything pre-Linda Goodman, I didn't touch until much later. And they're super gendered. And I don't know if, I don't think a lot of people listening, if you're a millennial, you're not, I think you'll remember this, but I might be wrong, in Gen X here. And I very crisply remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, and I wouldn't even say gender roles, that sounds expansive. Men were supposed to pretty much be XYZ, and women were supposed to be Z. It was very codified, and the 80s started pushing that. You can look at, and Bowie was doing it in the 70s, but a lot of 80s acts started pushing, and Boy George coming out was radical, y'all. Radical.
I loved Boy George.
Radical. Early 80s, and Reagan's just come in the US. That was, but the music was and still is great. Thank you very much. That was radical shift. And we get to the end of the 80s and things have just loosened up. And I could go on a whole rant there, and I don't have enough time to pull together a talk I want for this astrology conference. But yeah, just there's a whole Aquarius thing there. I'll just throw that out there, which I've spoken about before, but want to refine the talk and present it again. But the way we're in this hashtag new age of air, and the way that astrology is more available, and all these different planets that have been in Aquarius over the last 40 years, and we're going to continue on, right, with Pluto, which will be quite interesting as the quote unquote final, I don't know about the final act, but the final planet or major planet to go through, is I think we're going to move all that even more forward with the technology that said something about, Vanessa. And astrologers can now cast a chart in seconds, or even non-astrologers. I learned by hand, y'all, with a compass and a pencil, which is quite fascinating and fun to do. Pro math, but it took like 2 hours to do a chart. It took 2 hours to do, because you were calculating, right, each position and cuts by hand, and maybe you double check yourself, maybe you don't, and okay, now you start interpreting. But to be able to let that 2 hours go and spend 2 hours interpreting and then maybe dialogue, that takes things further. And I'm hoping in this 21st century, astrologers will really get out of their own way and check themselves, but still be who they are, and really help people to be their whole 360 and come out of this, the square, if you know this term, I think it's from the jazz era, but people being square, man, that's really square. And let me be clear, some days I feel very square and others, but astrology, I think, has always, I think Kara said this better than I will right now, a good few minutes ago, has always invited us to wholeness. But I think that's been attached to what we would say today, or what I'll say at least, is class and money, right? It's been for the royals, it's been for the upper class, at least the astrology plus history that I know. And now it's quote unquote for everybody. I mean, people can do their own. That's a drastic change in our lifetimes, and certainly over the centuries and millennia.
That's so Aquarian, isn't it? Yeah, the knowledge to the people, thanks to technology. Yeah, it's amazing. And that's a great point, Demetrius. I hadn't thought as much about that for Aquarius, but yeah, there's this continuing of planets through Aquarius that has been going for decades now, like the handoff. Like I've been watching the Aries handoffs, a little bit of the Aquarius, but now that you mention it, it is, yeah, this is going to be that final installment. Like, and also the people coming through with those Aquarius placements, of course, Gen Z, which Care, I'm thinking you must be Gen Z.
No, I'm Gen Y. I'm 30. I look like a 14-year-old boy, but
so you're a millennial.
Yeah.
So you don't have,
I love that.
So do you have the outer planets in Capricorn?
No, so basically like I'm going through my sun return. So it's the end now. It's the very end, and it's gonna go into Pisces, enter Pisces soon. I think it's March 7th, isn't it? Like something like that. Or maybe the end of March. I think it was the 23rd, but now, yeah.
Oh, yes, of course.
Thank the Lord.
Yeah,
No,
you look really super young, and also European, no sunshine. Everyone looks like a baby.
Yeah, maybe it's that I am often, thought to be 20, but I love that. I mean, I think it's also because I dress like a 14-year-old skater boy, but I am 30, and God, my knees and back feel like 30 or like more, maybe, I don't know. I always say I'm a grandpa in practice. So, I try to now I take everything like away from my back, because I see how getting stuck on this computer is not going to help me.
Yes,
but I'm yeah, that's the problem with our lives now. But I have my sun return going through with Aquarius, and it's just the last 3 years. I'm gonna do a party, y'all, when it's over, because wow, Saturn, I mean, I love Saturn so much, but they really kicked my ass, I have to say. I'm a night chart too, I have to say, so maybe it's a little bit more hurtful, than Diurnal's chart, but it's been I mean, this last years, I think for everybody.
That's interesting. You say you call Saturn they. I always wonder, like with the planets, some things I'll just say it, some things I'll mix the genders to what people normally do. I kind of tend to mix it up. They's good. And sometimes I'll just gender everything she, and it's funny, Care, I watched some of your videos, and your older ones were saying, now don't get offended, I call everyone girl. I don't know if you still do.
I think that's also a Black thing. Sometimes we're like, girl.
Hey, girl. Yes, that's true. So yeah, I'll she a lot of things, but I think it's really important to mix it up just for people's brains to be like, oh, they never even see those two things together, like Mars as she or Venus as he. You still rarely see it. Maybe I'm just in the wrong algorithms, but I look for that and I very rarely see it, and I very rarely hear it. I do like,
Absolutely.
If you can neutral would be great as well, I think.
It is great too. I use it a lot too.
Yeah.
But sometimes I love to say they, just because they feel so present in my life that
I think they's good. I think they's good. I feel like I haven't used that much and rarely see it, but it makes a lot of sense. And I quite like the multiple idea of they for the planets, because they are so many archetypes all in one. So that fits quite nicely.
Absolutely.
Keeps it a little bit more open.
Yeah, I always say that I use they, them as pronouns for me also, because I think it's the plurality that is offered with they, them that I feel so much more comfortable with, that I'm plural. I have no idea. Ask me tomorrow who I will be. Maybe I will be a different person. And I feel like planets too, depending on where they are in the skies, with, what kind of aspect they're making with what planet. I feel like they're very also plural. And I feel like in my chart also, Sun has been so showing itself very differently. So showing themselves very differently. So yeah, I love the plurality of they, them.
I love that. That's a really great way of seeing it. And it's a Pisces, I think, would really relate as well. I like to say, the multi-hyphen, and Demetrius, you were talking about multi-hyphen as well earlier. I did put that in at least my last book. Remember, we're multi-hyphen, and, astrologers were not just astrologers, they were mathematicians, this, that, the other. They were literally multi-hyphen. These are some of those things. So you can see yourself as that. Okay, you just put it in a really great way. I like that a lot. Yeah, so they make sense. Because we are, especially for the mutables. I'm like, so mutable.
I'm a Sag rising, just so you know. So like my corners are mutable too. And I feel like also it's just, I can't be into one thing. It's just, I tried, but I mean, you see what I do. I don't do astrology only. It's been really hard. My commitment to when I entered my Saturn return was like, okay, I'm just going to commit to healing, which was so in healing. It was kind of my way to be like, okay, in healing, I can do practice so many different modalities. I can do so many different things. I can go into sound, into, hypnosis, Reiki, astrology, tarot, but still I really felt that it's hard for me to just do one thing. And I think it's, for a lot of us, it's hard to do one thing. It's just that the model that we've been raised in kind of favors people who just do one thing their whole life. But also, have you seen the economy? Who can do one thing?
It's definitely changing. Yeah, for sure. I reject labels as well. I just always identified as, I am a creative person. Like Neptune's on my sun. Of course, I'm going to say that. I'm a creative person. And then I've kind of tried to force myself to be able to say I am an astrologer, but I have focused on astrology, like you realizing you need to have some kind of like central point to anchor everything in, all of this into. I just decided that would be astrology. And then everything else can come into that, but it gives it something. Knowing how highly mutable Sagittarius, I've got 5 planets in Sagittarius, Mars is in Pisces, the Neptune's on the sun, and Jupiter's on the sun in Sagittarius. So it's just like, I want to be everything. I am everything.
I love that. I feel the same.
Yeah, exactly. So even through art, I find, because I can do anything that's creative, as you can imagine, with all of that. And I just look at the fixed signs like Taurus. They have this style, like a lot of famous artists have a very distinctive style. And that seems to be really important to people, to be able to have a handle on you, that they know exactly what you are and you show up as that all the time. I have Taurus rising, so I'm a very consistent person, but it's like, don't fence me in. And things that I do, even studying, I did a fashion and textile design degree. And we would, a few competitions we were entering as part of our course, and you had to kind of do the idea first, and then you get to the next stage. And I would be getting through because I tend to win stuff like that and get traction. But I couldn't keep replicating because the next one's going to be different. I couldn't do the same thing again because I'm not fixed. And a Taurus would be like just stamping it out, and I just couldn't do it. And I realized that is probably not a strength in that area for arts. But with astrology, you can go so many places, and it's that flexibility I feel like I've been able to bring into it, and then start to open it up from the inside, which has been supported in these times, which is really great.
Yeah, I also have my moon in Scorpio in the 12th, and that really helps me ruling the 8th. And that, I feel like I'm happy to have a Scorpio moon, just because then there's this fixed energy about, then I can be really set also on something. I can be really stubborn. But I love, I love to like study, practice things that I can go deep in. If I feel like within 2 months I can do the whole thing, I'm just like, no, give me a 2000 plus year practice. I don't want to talk about this. So I found that astrology is such an amazing practice also, because you would never be able to be like, okay, I've learned everything, now it's over. So for people who just get bored very easily and are curious, this is just so amazing. And then there's the relational practice also of like, you can talk to anybody through astrology. Well, not anybody, but you can talk to people through astrology. You can, even if people, which is so funny because, people will be like, oh, I don't believe in astrology, but then we'll talk to you about the moon and the ocean for like hours. And you're like, you're 70% of water, right? But if the moon kind of like, has a huge effect on the oceans, maybe, but I feel like it's such an amazing also relational practice, just because people are always want to know more about where we are, land-based practices, because capitalism is kind of lying to us and we know this, so might as well go back to land practices that make us feel belong, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's also true. Very interesting. I think, Care, I like the way that you are presenting things. It's not always easy to encapsulate all these big ideas into words and focus it in, but I like the ideas that you're presenting. So let's start to wrap it up. Everyone, I'm going to buy a ticket. I want to hear what people have to say. So, Demetrius, how do people find the Queer Astrology Conference? Is it pre-recorded? Is it live? Can you give us all the details?
Definitely. So yes, the talks are pre-recorded, but it's a live event. Pre-recorded just makes less there were some concerns last time, let's say in 2020. So pre-recorded. And it is all online, whether mobile, a desktop, or laptop. I'm going to make some adjustments so that runs smoother in the next day or so. People can find, let me back up and say, we're in a new home. So queerastrology.com is our website. We have a Facebook page that I monitor here and there. It's pretty quiet. Queerastrology.com is going to point to Circle. We're on Circle now. Circle it reminds me of Facebook groups. Sorry if you don't like Facebook groups. But it has more containers. I do have fixed on my chart. I have more mutable, ironically. But I think it will allow us to, during the conference and beyond the conference, and you can even go back and look at the other conferences, to be able to connect and be virtual community, because as like in this conversation, we are literally across the globe, if not the universe.
America, Australia, Berlin.
We didn't have that in the ways that I wanted from the 2020. I misunderstood what a key part of the technologies there that we used, and Circle has emerged and is swiftly bringing a lot. It wants to be an all-in-one site. It's not there yet, to be quite honest. So Queer Astrology for this comp already lives there, and for this 6th conference and going forward, we'll live there. So we have sort of an ongoing, we literally have a space called the living room. So we can connect and chat. There's plenty to talk about, as you both just said, by way of astrology, and certainly working with I don't know if I want to call it a tool, energy, I don't know, but working with queer astrology in the ways that we've talked about in this conversation. We'll continue, although we're varying it a little bit because we're using different technology this time, 3 different price points. So let me get my language right today. So the requested sum is $63 for the conference. Supportive is $90. And then supported is $36. Those are all US dollar prices. One of the things I've loved since Queer Astrology Conference got started back in 2012, coming off of the UAC in New Orleans, is how does Ian say, and I've loved this phrase and taken it to some other spaces, decoupling the dollar and the door, right? Some of what Kara's talked about is we're not denying anybody because of money. And this is really not just about astrology conferences, although I could go on a very good rant about that. This is about conferences in general. It's been interesting for me to follow conversations in other fields and spaces, the hotel, the air, or the train, or driving, the food, taking off time of work, particularly as astrologers. Not that everybody that practices astrology, that's their main income, ... So we do want to be affordable, and we'll continue doing that there. You asked something else I feel like I didn't answer. We'll be on Saturday, February 5th, live, 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll probably go to officially 9 p.m. Which is funny. I just wrote, the speakers will be there with their talk. They will do a live Q&A. I just thought of something technical, sorry, or operational even, with their talk, and they may or may not respond into the chat during the talks. I think there's a way that a lot of speakers, their style, they need to just talk and then they can later do the Q&A, but sometimes time runs over or whatever. So I'm trying to nip and tuck, if I could say it that way, things so they can be in the chat actually live. I've seen that at some other events, and the dynamic is quite fascinating because then people start paying attention to the live speaker, not the live talk, but they can go back to the talk, right? These options, right? Because we're out of these tried and true things about speaking. So I think that gives you plenty, but I want to stress that we're on Circle, which I recognize is not a platform that a lot of people yet know, but Circle is circle.so is just the sort of general product, if I could call it that. It's not Facebook, without me going on a rant about that. It's not Twitter, which I still love, but I don't know about that. But yeah, the main reason we're using it is it seems to be the best technology to check a lot of boxes that we need to do a lot of things to do, but so we can just keep conversations ongoing. As Vanessa, you probably recall, I don't know if you were able to come through in 2020, Kier, if you knew about us, but there were so many juicy talks that were very political, and really and still astrology, and really useful. And I felt like one of the things I didn't do correctly was leave a virtual space for each of those talks, right? There were almost 4 talks, roundtables, or otherwise presentations. And so that's why we're on Circle, so we can have that going back to the first 5 Queer Astrology conferences, and now the 6th one, and then going forward.
Okay, cool. Well, I can't wait to watch the talks. I think it's really interesting, Demetrius, what Demetrius pointed out, which was they were, because it's true, I watched some of the ones from 2020 and it was a very political, and it was very, the beginning of this wave of everything's hardcore. And I know for myself, even I've backed off. I've got Aries moon and all that fire as well. I've backed off and I've just thought, you know what, it's just all very stressful. Let's just be gentle with each other. I feel like Demetrius is you're bringing your Cancer moon as well to this, speaking of care. And yeah, it's more gentle. It's more like, actually, let's take a different approach. So I'm really happy to hear that's evolved. I think those conversations needed to be presented and put forward. And like you said, that space being made, and now it's evolving into something else, which is so fantastic to see as such a growing community as well, jump into the pool and keep developing all of this.
I want to say 2 things to close for myself. Part of why Queer Astrology as a movement, because there are more pieces beyond the conference, but specific to the conference, which I've been largely involved with, most, like I said, but not all, is these political talks, irrespective of people being queer. There's at least one speaker, Sarah Reynolds, that spoke at the second one about, well, I won't go into that, but fascinating talk about an Olympian. Still within the framework, right, of queer meets astrology, is these talks they haven't, and they still struggle, if I can say it that way, to get opportunities to be on other quote unquote stages and other spaces. I'm still chewing on why, but meanwhile, I want to make sure, because there's so many more astrologers than there were in 2020 and 2018, and then all the way back to 2013, queer and not. Queer identified, maybe I would say. And then the other thing I want to say that maybe everybody will get now, but I don't know, I've known it for a while as event producer, but it really hit strong more in the early pandemic with the lockdowns, is events are so important for humans. Astrology can be such a solitary practice, at least the prep before you get to the clients or the writing the horoscopes, or when you get it to an audience or out to people. And I think this is a number of fields, but we need to talk shop and get together and expand our minds and drop a bias. And, oh, I don't need to use all these gendered words that I don't really know why Mars is often referred to, or almost always, as he and. We need to get together, is what I'm saying, as a card-carrying Aquarius, as a Gemini rising, period, as humans, right? I think we all, most of us are clear on that. And astrologers more so, because my premise has been for 20 plus years, a little bit into me studying astrology. And I think I said this already, but maybe I can say it better now, or at least just repeat it. In the 21st century, we're going to need astrology to move humans forward. We've got to be our whole selves. We can still play with coins or money or whatever, but not at the detriment to the planet, not a detriment to ourselves, not a detriment to the animals. And arguably the universe, if people want to go to Mars and the moon, back to the moon, and. So I hope people will continue to embrace astrology. It's a fascinating tool. It is not a pseudoscience. Thank you very much. You won't even have sciences without astrology. Do your research.
Exactly.
Hello. Queer folks know how to have fun, y'all, among many, many other things. Come through.
Highly recommended. Yes. Well, see you all there. Looking forward to the conversations that come out of this as well. Speaking of, your time is coming, Demetrius. All the Aquarians will be watching as Pluto works its way through also. Yeah, no, fingers crossed. And yeah, I agree. I think we've all realized how much community is important, and it's been amazing to watch it grow and form actually in the queer community, and with astrology as a bit of a linchpin on all of that. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Care and Demetrius, and talking about your talk and the conference. Thanks so much for putting this on, Demetrius. Amazing work, very important. And yeah, I think more and more relevant as well, as people come in and kind of leave that binary system and those really restrictive roles as well. So I think that this kind of ideas and just fostering ideas and community, having the conversations, asking the questions is really valuable work just for people generally, especially as we get into more both division and separation, as well as the balance on the other end of the people realizing, let's come together actually. So good luck with the conference. Great luck. Good luck with your talk. And everyone, please let us know how you go with this. What are your thoughts on queer and queer astrology in the community and what we've talked about? We would all love to hear feedback on that and keep that conversation going.
Thank you
so
both
much
for all your wisdom. Thank you, Vanessa, for having us on. If you want to keep the conversation going publicly, you can, do you have a hashtag? Well, you can tweet VEGAND, VEGAND. Is there a hash? Let's say hashtag QAC, as in Queer Astrology Conference 23. At least the three of us are very curious to know who's listening and what they think about queer astrology.
We are. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
And how do we find you, Care?
You can find me on Instagram, Self-Love Tribute, or my website is selflovetribute.com.
Okay, easy.
You can find everything here. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. And everyone, stay cosmic. Enjoy the conference.